A cold night inside a shelter made of branches, animal hides, and dry grass. A small fire crackles right in the middle. Around the edges of this cramped space, 6 or 8 people are fast asleep. One lies near the entrance. A child is curled up next to an adult. Sharp tools have been pushed away from the resting area, and a few people have their feet pointing straight toward the heat. Suddenly, a branch snaps outside the shelter. Not everyone wakes up instantly. Only one person opens their eyes. They shift slightly, and that change in posture quickly spreads to the person lying right next to them. We are looking at an interesting paradox. Are these people lying in a circle because they want to create a mutually defensive formation, or simply because it's the most logical way to share the warmth of a single fire? That circle looks like a perfect defensive tactic, but it might have started with a much simpler problem. In a tiny shelter, everyone wants to be near the center without lying on top of each other. Why might early humans have slept in a circle? That is just the surface of the question. The deeper mystery we need to decode is, what is actually at the center of them? Are they trying to optimize heat, light, social distance, or defense? Or did the shape of the shelter itself force them to lie that way? To understand this, we will test 4 main hypotheses. First, the central hearth hypothesis, sharing equal access to fire. Second, the alarm network hypothesis, shortening the distance a warning has to travel. Third, the space organization hypothesis, separating the resting zone from the working zone. And finally, the perimeter hypothesis, creating an outer boundary with a different function. Archaeology can show us the dirt floors and the remains of hearths. Sleep biology can show us how distributed vigilance works in a group. But no data source allows us to read the minds of people who are fast. Before explaining the benefits of the circle, we need to clarify one harsh reality. Archaeology never finds a ring of sleeping people. It only finds physical traces from which that shape is sometimes inferred. So what do archaeologists actually see? They might identify a resting area through a combination of clues. It could be a ground surface with very few sharp tools and animal bone debris. It could be plant material brought in from the outside, compacted soil, its relative location to the hearth, the boundaries of the shelter, or the repetition of activity zones. At Ohalo II, intentionally laid grass provides incredibly rare evidence of an actual sleeping area. But at Abric Romani, a sleeping area was interpreted mainly from the distance between burning zones and the distribution of artifacts. Clearly, evidence of sleep can be very direct, but it can also be an indirect deduction. From here, we have to drop our first misconception, the image of a perfect circle. Humans didn't need to create an even geometric ring. The actual layout might be a circle broken at the doorway, a half-moon backing up against a cliff face, or multiple family clusters gathered around different hearths. People might sleep close to the shelter wall, but not necessarily point their heads in the same direction. The resting area might be curved, simply because the shelter wall is curved. A perfect circle gradually gets distorted by doors, walls, smoke, the presence of families, belongings, and wind direction. Ultimately, it becomes a much more practical, open. The second misconception is the idea that everyone sleeps at the exact same. Data from the Hadza people shows that in a co-sleeping group, different biological rhythms and sleep patterns mean there is almost always someone awake or in a very light stage of sleep. This doesn't prove that Paleolithic people posted night guard. It just reminds us that a sleeping group does not mean every body is motionless and unaware at the exact same. The third misconception is the belief that the circle was born purely to fend off predators. A sleeping space has to solve a whole host of complex problems. It has to deal with temperature, smoke, keeping pathways clear, maintaining a safe distance from the hearth, protecting toddlers, and avoiding sharp objects and food scraps. Research on hunter-gatherer camp spaces shows that a circular layout is just one of many residential models. Linear layouts, or those with no clear shape, also appear very frequently. When we drop the image of a perfect formation, a simpler mechanism starts to emerge. A shared center can organize a lot of bodies without anyone ever drawing a circle in the dirt. The first layer of this mechanism is sharing a central heat source. A hearth radiates heat in multiple directions. If several people want to be within a beneficial distance, lying around the fire distributes that distance relatively evenly. Fewer people are completely blocked behind someone else's back, and the group doesn't have to waste effort building more fire. Plus, the people responsible for adding wood can reach the flames from multiple sides. At Lazarette Cave, heat and smoke simulations showed that the placement of a hearth heavily influences the area that can be comfortably occupied long term. The reconstructed resting area fit perfectly within the zone that had the right environmental conditions. This strongly supports the idea that the hearth acts as a space organizing device, even if it doesn't prove that sleeping people had to form a closed ring. The second layer is utilizing the edges of the shelter. In a circular or oval space, the center is always the most ideal spot for a hearth and communal activities. Conversely, right up against the walls is where people walk the least. Bedding material can be kept clean and isolated from the working area. People sleeping here won't block traffic around the fire, and the tent wall itself provides a safe boundary while partially blocking cold winds. The Étiolles archaeological site clearly demonstrates this spatial logic. Work and fire dominate the middle, while resting is pushed to the edges. Ohalo II also shows a carefully arranged sleeping area right against the wall of a plant-based hut. The third layer is the ability to shorten the alarm network. In a small, tightly packed group, one person hearing a strange noise might slightly shift their posture or speak up. The person lying right next to them will instantly wake up. Information about a threat travels rapidly through physical contact, sound, and small movements. The entire group can react before everyone even understands exactly what the threat is. A circle isn't the only shape that does this. The core element is the short, continuous distance between members. Hadza data shows that age differences and sleep rhythms create a distributed network of vigilance, but it doesn't test whether a circle transmits warnings faster than another layout. The fourth layer is the division between inner and outer zones. A circular layout automatically creates two distinct directions, facing the center and facing the tent wall or the darkness. This allows the group to keep the fire and shared activities in the middle while pushing sharp objects or trash away from the resting area. It also creates the possibility of placing those who need care close to those who can help. Placing children or the elderly on the safer inside is a highly logical deduction, but it has never been proven as a universal rule. The fifth layer is balancing contact and social distance. A ring around a center allows multiple people to see each other's faces. They can converse without having to shout over someone else's. Each family unit still retains a distinct segment of space, while the central area remains shared. Spatial analyses of 263 hunter-gatherer camps show that camp infrastructure always reflects social structure and the number of co-residing families. The sleeping layout isn't just an ecological function, it's a physical manifestation of social relationships. Ultimately, you don't need a single benefit large enough for ancient humans to invent the sleeping ring. The shape can exist simply because it meets multiple needs at the same time. It is warm enough, close enough, doesn't block the path, makes it easy to wake each other up, and perfectly fits the outer shell of the shelter. A circle might be effective not because it is absolutely perfect at one function, but because it is pretty good at several functions simultaneously. This mechanism sounds highly logical, but the actual evidence pulled from the ground never forms a complete circle. It looks like a series of disconnected puzzle pieces, and each archaeological site only retains a small fraction of the picture. About 23,000 years ago, at the Ohalo II open-air camp by an ancient lake in Israel, archaeologists found a structure exceptionally preserved by waterlogged conditions. Inside a plant brush hut, they noted bundles of grass carefully arranged in layers. This material was fixed with a clay base, creating a relatively comfortable and clean area real against the wall. The hearth and other working zones were in the same space, but clearly separated. Researchers interpret this as very early in situ evidence of an intentionally prepared sleeping area. Ohalo II proves that at least one Paleolithic group knew how to separate where they slept from where they worked. They brought in plant material chose a specific part of the hut to rest, and organized space based on function. When the resting zone runs along the wall and the hearth is near the center, the people lying in that space would likely form an arc or a ring around the central area. The bed was preserved. But the postures of the people lying on it were not. This evidence stops at one exceptionally well-preserved hut. It cannot represent every era or geographic region. Another example takes us to France, around 15,000 years ago. Magdalenian people built dwellings at Étiolles in the Paris. The structures here are described as circular, about 5 meters in diameter, containing a hearth right in the middle. Areas used for making tools and preparing food were arranged immediately around the fire. Meanwhile, the strip of space against the tent wall was reserved specifically for resting. 2 shelters, U5 and P15, existed at the same time. U5 even had a ring of stone slabs marking the tent outline and internal rows of stones used to divide the space. These physical traces allow researchers to reconstruct how families organize their activities. This is the closest case to the image our video title suggests. A circular outer shell, a valuable center point, a resting zone wrapping around the outside, all shared by family. If multiple people lay along the edge of the tent, a circular or semicircular layout would appear almost naturally. You don't need to force people into a ring. You just need to give them a round tent, a fire in the middle, and a strip of clean floor against the wall. But a sleeping area cannot be placed arbitrarily around a fire. At Unit UA-25 of Lazaret Cave, France, a simulation study tested 16 hypothetical hearth locations. They placed about 6,000 virtual sensors in the 3D space of the cave to check smoke levels at standing, sitting, and lying heights. Then, they compared the area that could be occupied long-term based on heat and the distance to the fire source. The results showed that the actual archaeological hearth sat neatly within a small modeled zone that offered the best balance between a low-smoke area, a warm enough distance, and long-term working space. The zones interpreted by the excavators as resting or sleeping areas all fit perfectly within the space that could be used long-term while the fire was burning. This means the cave users had to constantly compromise. They had to lie close enough to get warm, but far enough away to avoid breathing space. They couldn't block the shared working space, and the location had to align with natural airflows and the shape of the cave. So, a theoretical circle could easily be warped into an arc, a cluster, or an irregular strip by the pressures of the environment. The geometry of radiating fire is circular, but the geometry of breathable space is not. And sometimes, humans completely break the rule of a single center. At Abric Romani, in the northeast Iberian Peninsula, there is a well-preserved Neanderthal living surface, around 55,000 years old. A spatial analysis interpreted the sleeping area here as consisting of up to 5 different burning zones, spaced about 1 meter apart, located next to an area with less production activity. This case directly refutes the idea that a group always had to revolve around one massive fire. Multiple small hearths might distribute heat more effectively among clusters of people. It creates private sleeping areas for individual families, reduces competition for prime real estate around a single center, and is particularly suited to an elongated rock shelter rather than a round. Sometimes the best way to share a fire isn't to try and divide it up, but to simply make more fire. If a circle isn't mandatory for sharing warmth, is it mandatory for maintaining vigilance? Researchers used actigraphy devices to track the nighttime biological rhythms of the Hadza people in Tanzania. Over 20 days of observation, the total time that absolutely everyone was asleep simultaneously was a mere 18 minutes. There was at least one person awake or in light sleep for 99.8% of the night. A group with mixed ages and biological rhythms can create continuous vigilance. They don't need everyone to face outward, they don't need an official guard shift, and they don't need a perfect defensive ring. When lying close together, a waking person can detect changes and pass the warning to others. A circle might aid that transmission, but the study itself did not map out the sleeping positions of each individual. Archaeology shows us beds, hearths, and the edges of tents. Sleep biology shows that a co-living group is almost never completely caught off guard. The missing piece of the puzzle is convincing evidence that humans deliberately combine those benefits into an intentional circular formation. We always assume that if they lay in a circle, they must have faced outward to watch for predators. But while awake, facing the center allows them to see who is talking, work in the light, access food, tend the fire, and watch the toddlers. When sleeping, humans constantly change posture. There is absolutely no scientific basis to imagine them all lying motionless with their heads pointing out into the night like sentries. It might be that the spatial architecture determined the shape of sleep before they even thought about defense. If the shell of the shelter is round, and the middle area is already dedicated to the hearth, cooking, tool repair, and pathways, then the remaining space naturally becomes a curved strip along the wall. Sites like Étiolles and Ohalo II strongly support this center periphery. It is possible early humans didn't actively build a sleeping ring. They built a shelter, and the shelter built the sleeping ring for them. A circular layout also generates quite a few. The person near the doorway will suffer from cold drafts and constant interruption. Those in the smoke-free blind spots definitely have a more comfortable position. A loud cough or a crying baby in the middle of the night can wake the entire. Emergency exits can easily be blocked by bodies and belongings. If the fire is built too large, those around the center might overheat or inhale too much smoke. If the fire is too small, the circle is forced to shrink, or some people will be pushed outside the radiating heat. Besides, the sleeping space is also a place where social relationships are expressed. Households in a hunter-gatherer camp are not anonymous, interchangeable units. The structure of the camp reflects the number of co-residing families, the degree of kinship, the division of activities, and the scale of the entire group. Spatial analyses from hundreds of camps show that physical infrastructure is always intimately tied to internal organization, even if this data isn't detailed enough for us to deduce rules for every specific sleeping spot. Looking at the big picture, the whole group might not be one giant circle. A large camp might consist of several small shelters. Each shelter has its own hearth. Each family has its own resting area, and a communal space sits in the middle of the entire camp. From a distance, the camp has a circular shape. But looking closely, the sleeping people are distributed in completely separate clusters. A circle of people, a circle of sleeping areas, a circle of shelters, or a circular shelter. These four shapes are absolutely not synonymous. Once we clearly separate these levels, a more fascinating question emerges. Did the circle actually make the group safer? Or are we looking at a convenient layout and painting an epic tale of defense over it? There are much simpler alternative explanations. First is the shape of the shelter. Dome-shaped shelters easily create a round or oval floor. People sleeping around the walls might just be trying to maximize headroom, find a windbreak, or simply lie in the area with the least foot traffic. Circular architecture is common in ethnographic descriptions of mobile hunter-gatherers, but that architecture does not automatically come with an anti-predator function. The second explanation comes from the need for heat. In freezing environments, distance to the fire is often far more critical than an outward-facing. Sleepers might prioritize pointing their feet toward the heat, or huddle together on one side to avoid a cold draft. The result is a half circle rather than a closed ring. Balancing heat and smoke doesn't necessarily produce a perfectly round resting zone. The third explanation lies in the family units themselves. Humans tend to sleep next to their partners, children, siblings, or members sharing the same shelter. These close relationships can completely override the abstract geometric benefits of forming one massive ring for the whole group. And when looking back at the vigilance network hypothesis, the truth is, the Hadza almost always have someone awake. But that vigilance stems from asynchronous biological rhythms, not a requirement to arrange themselves in a circle. The awake person might be sitting in a different tent altogether. Therefore, the data only supports the mechanism of group vigilance. it does not directly support a circular sleeping formation. The biggest limitation always lies in the archaeological. We cannot definitively determine their sleeping postures, which way they faced, the order of who lay on the inside or outside, or whether that layout was rigidly repeated over many nights. We have evidence that some shelters were organized around a hearth with a resting zone on the periphery. But we have absolutely no evidence to assert that all early humans adhered to a circular sleeping formation to fend off danger. But it is exactly that uncertainty that makes the modern significance of this behavior so clear. Humans don't need to invent a shape to continuously recreate it. When a modern group of people sits around a campfire, the chairs gradually form an arc. Everyone automatically adjusts their position so they can see each other's faces, maintains a relatively even distance so everyone gets warmth, and intentionally leaves a gap as a walkway to add wood. No one in the group needs to shout an order. Let's form a circle. That shape emerges completely naturally from the shared conditions of the environment and the need for communication. That exact same principle exists around round tables, group games, small team meetings, or when everyone automatically clusters around a single flashlight during a power outage. This modern echo doesn't mean we carry a genetic circular sleeping instinct inherited from the past. What it actually proves is, when a resource can be accessed from all sides, humans usually organize space so that as many people as possible can share that center point while still maintaining the ability to see and hear each other. This spatial layout turns isolated individuals into part of a social network. A small noise from one person is instantly noticed by another. The absence of one person creates a physical gap. And if just one member wakes up, the state of the entire group can shift. Lying close together and continuously maintaining that connection increases the value of sleeping as a group, regardless of its exact shape on the ground. So, when we return to that dark shelter at the beginning of the story, the answer doesn't lie in a single reason. It lies in the survival problems that one identical shape manages to solve. Back in the quiet space under the tent roof, the first person to hear the snapping branch has woken up. That person doesn't suddenly leap up, grabbing a weapon like a defensive warrior. There is only a very small change. A turn of the head, a light touch to the person lying next to them, a glance toward the hearth, and intent listening. One by one, the other members begin to wake up, following that ripple of warmth. Some early humans might have slept in a circle or an arc because the hearth and the communal workspace sat at the center, pushing the suitable resting zone right to the edge of the shelter. That arrangement helped multiple people maintain a relatively close distance to the heat, stay out of the messy working zone, easily hear one another, and transmit warning signals much faster. But we cannot yet claim the circle was a universal anti-predator formation, or that all ancient humans slept in that exact way. It is highly likely they didn't start with the intention of setting up a protective ring. They just started by choosing where to place the fire, leaving a clear path, lying next to loved ones, and trying to avoid breathing smoke. The circle was simply the end result. Sleep in modern society is usually imagined as a highly private act. One body, one bed, one closed room. But for the vast majority of human history, sleeping could be the state of an entire collective. One person slowly drifts off, another is still tossing and turning. A child stirs, the firelight flickers and shifts, and the smallest sounds ripple across multiple bodies lying side by side. The circle may not have been a shield. It may have been the shape of shared sleep. The fire gradually dies down. One person who just woke up now peacefully goes back to sleep. On the other side of the ring, someone else slowly opens. That shape doesn't protect them because everyone is vigilant at the. It works effectively because vigilance is always quietly moving through the entire group.